Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to this webinar for a few weeks now, and it's great to see you here. My name is Janet Rosbach. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations and Volunteer Engagement at Baruch College. We have a wonderful partnership with the organization BoardStrong that was previously known as Governance Matters, and they are keen to help train the next generation of board members for nonprofit organizations. And we think Baruch alumni are perfect individuals to get involved with the nonprofit sector, not just as nonprofit leaders, of which we have several here today, but also as board members. I'll let Barbara Paxton speak a little bit more about that shortly. But first, I'd like to introduce our co-sponsor, and that is George Spotlight. That is George Mitchell from the Center for Nonprofit Strategy and Management. George.
Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this very beautiful Friday afternoon here in New York. I'd just like to let you know we have another event sponsored by our nonprofit center you might be interested in on May 17th from 12 to 1. We're co-hosting an event with Interaction, the International NGO Alliance organization, to share international NGO CEO perspectives about current and future change. So I'll drop a couple links into the chat in case you're interested. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Janet. Thanks.
Thank you so much. As we move forward with the program, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel, please type it into the chat or send me a message, and during our Q&A session, I will follow up accordingly. With that, I'm delighted to introduce Barbara Paxton.
Thank you so much, Janet. I'm delighted to be here with this fantastic panel. So BoardStrong is indeed an organization dedicated to good nonprofit governance. We do consulting, we do training, we do cool things like this in partnership with Baruch. And we also help, we encourage people who are not on boards to join them. So in that vein, we are also having an event on June 6th for people who are interested in joining a board but aren't on one now. Highly recommend everybody consider joining one if you are not on one already. It's a wonderful way to give back to your community and also stretch your leadership skills a little bit. So I will put that information in the chat as well. But let's move on to this fantastic panel of representatives of international organizations. This is the, I guess, 5th or 6th of our partnership series, and we've had a lot of fascinating topics. This is going to be a great one as well. So I'm going to ask each panel member to introduce himself briefly, and I'll just start with the person who's left on my screen. So Ido, please let us know a little bit about who you are and what your organization is.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm Ido, and I'm from Israel. I'm the CEO of Ruach Tova. Ruach Tova is basically the meaning is good spirit, and we operate in Israel in the field of volunteerism. And in a nutshell, we specialize in matching between the public and volunteer organizations. Our goal is to make volunteering in Israel efficient, effective, and accessible by working directly with the NGOs in Israel, mainly businesses and municipalities, and everything that connects between the three sectors. And we're doing it for the past 20 years. Among our key initiatives, you might have heard of Good Deeds Day, which is basically it's an international event or movement, basically, and we celebrated with organization from more than 110 countries around the globe.
Thank you so much. That's great. Fascinating. Thank you. Matt?
Hi, good afternoon. I am so pleased to be here. My name is Matthew Aubry. I'm the Executive Director for the Organization for Responsible Governance. On my back, my own personal side, I was at Baruch back in the late 80s and then also was able to teach a little bit more recently along with the Public Policy Institute. I have somehow ended up from New York into the Bahamas now. And so our organization here in Nassau, Bahamas works for the last 7 years on functions of governance. So fighting for accountability and transparency in our laws, for citizen representation, and we do a lot of civic engagement. So helping Bahamian citizens to kind of reclaim their voice and get involved in ways that can benefit not only their community, their own selves, but ultimately the nation. We also focus on economic development because that's such a critical need here. COVID really showed how essential it is that a lot of island states like ours have a thriving local economy. When you're dependent upon only tourism or things that happen elsewhere, when that stops, bad things happen. So we've been doing a lot of work in that space. But underneath all of that, we really focus on how we foster opportunities in education. Our youth are clearly one of the biggest keys to sustainability. And what we're seeing is that there's not enough information, education and access being provided to the local Bahamian youth to be able to be that sustainable workforce, business owners, future leaders that we need. So there's a key point on that. And then a little bit later in the game, we also realized that it was critical that there was a more vibrant and sustainable civil society sector here. So we've also attributed a significant portion of our time and effort to helping to facilitate the building of other not-for-profit organizations here. We tend to be one of the more professionally organized groups here, but we have over 1,000 not-for-profits in a population of only 400,000. So there's a lot of us out there, but they tend to be small and we're relatively disorganized. So we're doing a lot to better understand the sector, bring forward trainings and issues related to standards, and then helping the sector to better get involved and be that kind of third part of the society so that it counterbalances and also complements both government and the private sector.
That's great. So one quick follow-up question on that. So, obviously his organization, he's just said works with hundreds of countries. Are you only in the Bahamas, or do you have a wider geographical reach?
We are only in the Bahamas. We were started by Bahamians. I'm kind of the import, and I got here because of the most illegitimate way. I followed a beautiful woman here and married her. So, but yeah, our organization is staffed by Bahamians, focused on Bahamians. We also obviously have an impact in the region, and we interface with lots of different global partners, but it's always towards the benefit of how do we improve our local circumstances and start to develop long-term solutions to things that have plagued us in our history. The Bahamas is only 50 years since its independence. This is actually celebrating our 50th year. So it's a relatively new country, but there still are some significant moves that need to happen in order to kind of get to the next 50 years.
Perfect. Thank you. Wasim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wasim Matman. I am a board director at Yemen Aid. Yemen Aid is a nonprofit organization, 501c3 organization that is based in the U.S. that provides humanitarian aid and implements sustainable development projects in Yemen, especially the higher need, higher conflict areas in Yemen. We provide assistance to individuals, families, and relief organizations in Yemen as the population continues to endure an ongoing conflict, and as a result, people in Yemen have lacked basic human needs as a result of the conflict. Our mission statement is to create, develop, and maintain programs designed around health, medical assistance, clean water, food security, sustainability, and women's empowerment in Yemen. While I'm not, aside from my board director role, I'm currently a student at University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School. Just completed my first year here. I'm also a alum of Baruch College, class of 2014.
That's fantastic. Thank you. All right, let's get to our first question. And I'm hoping, you all will just feel free to jump in and make this a real conversation. But I think first we need to start a little bit about how are your boards structured? What are the requirements? How is your recruiting and being on your board different than a domestic US organization? Anyone want to start? Or I'll just pick on.
I can jump in if that's okay.
There you go.
So what I've said here, what I've said often about the civil society sector here in the Bahamas is we're kind of in our adolescence. Tremendous amounts of talent, tremendous amounts of potential, lots of really amazing things that are happening on real local levels. At the same time, we kind of want our rights without our responsibilities. So we have to do a little bit more in professionalizing our industry. And a lot of that also starts in the instance of our boards. We have depended a lot on volunteers in our civil society sector here, but not necessarily in the most formalized ways. So instituting things like board requirements or mandates of what that board relationship are still kind of just getting themselves grounded here. We have some very well and historical and established organizations that have typical board structures that you would know, but they're a smaller group and they tend to be the few that are really well established and well funded. We just had a law in 2019 that was passed, the Not-for-Profit Act, which put levels of regulations on the industry. It was pushed more for our compliance with the FATF recommendations against terrorism financing and money laundering. So it was more a government's push to make sure they could tick a box and not get on any gray lists. But it did introduce the concept that there needed to be a board, there needed to be bylaws, and that there needed to be some level of financial reporting. So those are all new things for us here, which you would have very typically in existing not-for-profits in the States or in the UK or things like that. We've constituted a board around our mission, which preceded me for about a year. I came in after a year of the organization's management by volunteers, and that board has remained pretty consistent. So the terms of service that you might see haven't really been something we've addressed yet. It's part of a conversation we're having now. We see that the boards that found us are not necessarily the boards that are going to sustain us. So that's also somewhat typical of organizations that you see in the States, but there's not necessarily the formal mechanisms in place yet to make that typical movement happen. We do have board responsibilities. We do have a lot of structures, board roles. Those things are scripted. We have board policies and giving policies, but those have been put in. But our board functions a little bit more from the oversight level, and we're working on that sense of active volunteer leadership a little bit more than we have in past. The challenge for us, because we are a governance organization and this is a heavily politicized nation, is that we're always a little bit in opposition to whoever's in power. So people are not running and jumping on our board because they want to make sure that they don't fall afoul of those that might hold the legitimate power. So recruitment has taken a while. We have had a recent wave of folks that we've recruited on. And we're kind of in the middle of doing onboarding with them, which is maybe more focused than it has been in past, because we do see the need to adopt more standardized regulations and to get to that standard that's been set in places like the UK or the US.
That's awesome. So in some ways, you're creating a board and creating the nonprofit sector.
Unfortunately, we are kind of putting
Exactly.
the tracks down as the train is moving, but yeah, that is the pace we're going in.
That's very interesting. So I think I'm sure your nonprofit sector is a little bit more established in Israel. Tell us a little bit about your board and how you think about recruiting and their responsibilities.
Yeah, in Israel, it's the nonprofit organizations and the sector in general is very well structured, and an NGO in Israel must have a voluntary board. The board is liable for the organization basically, and selects the CEO. So they have a lot of responsibility on their hands ultimately. So they must be therefore they must care deeply about the field in which Baruch operates, or any other NGO operate, since it's their free time. They do it as volunteers, but they have a lot of responsibility. So that would be my primary requirement for a board member. He or she needs to care very deeply about the field of operation, and that is the most. And other than that, in my view, it is crucial that the board members will bring something unique to the table, whether it's an expertise, ability to help the organization raise money, a needed management experience, or any other value that can assist the organization to meet its goals. And specifically with Ruach Tova, since we're heavily funded by the Ted Arison Foundation, we have a couple of representatives in the board from the Ted Arison Foundation, and that makes it even more complicated. But that's a very specific case in Ruach Tova's case, and other organizations that are funded by foundations.
Yep. All right. Let's get to funding a little bit more later on. But Wasim, how long have you been on the board there?
Me?
Yeah.
Since late 2017. So it's quite some time, 6 years.
Seasoned board member. All right. Tell us a little bit about recruiting and structure and all of that.
Yeah. For context, Yemen Aid is a relatively young or new organization. I joined a little more than a year after the organization was incorporated and founded. So I say that to say we have a smaller board. We currently have 4 board members, and given our size of the size of the organization, we try not to have more than 10 at any given time. In terms of recruiting, similar to Ruach Tova, we like that, board members can bring something unique or something, or contribute in some way or fashion to the organization, and bring in their own experience to the organization. And also we try to identify folks that can essentially fill a gap or provide an expertise that we need in order to grow the organization. For example, at the time I was at Deloitte as a risk consultant, and when I joined, I was able to help kind of build out the organization's accounting or control framework and things of that nature. We have someone on our board who is a medical resident, and a lot of the work that we do is around health and medical care and things of that nature in Yemen. So he's able to provide that expertise. So that's a big part of it. We want folks who care deeply about our mission and the cause in Yemen, and it makes it challenging because Yemen doesn't get, or the situation in Yemen doesn't get as much attention as we feel it should. It's one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history, and Yemen Aid is doing a lot of work, a lot of impactful work in the country. So far, we've directed over $12 million in aid or in support, $12 million since our inception, but it doesn't even scratch the surface. So we want folks who care deeply about the mission and can help us kind of bring that awareness to the broader audience.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important cause. That's all of them. But all right. So let's talk a little bit about philanthropy and money. As we all know, if you join a board in the US, that's US focused, we generally like a balance of funds and our board members to help us raise money. Is that the case for you guys? Matt, go for it.
So the culture, again, as I said, is adapting on this issue. The give or get model is not, I would say, the typical. I think some organizations are just getting adjusted to having a board, and the expectation of those volunteer boards bringing more like technical services or in-kind services, or putting in their energy is more the standard. So the kind of the time and the talent, not necessarily the treasure. Our organization was founded with a principle that every board member would have to give $1,000 a month, either of cash or in kind. And it's probably a 60-40 split right now between cash and in kind. The expectation of philanthropy here is not what it is elsewhere. There are no built-in incentives to donate to a not-for-profit. So there's nothing, there's no tax. There's not really a tax model here, although there are taxes built into how we operate, but there's not a way to have a deference or reduction of that tax based on a donation. So
Right,
that's
makes
not
sense.
something that's built into our legislative framework, right? So it is then really upon each organization to try and set that expectation with their boards. And finding dedicated board members is also a process that I think we're in the developmental stages. There are a few folks that everybody wants. Like I could call 4 names and every group is like, oh, let's talk to them. And they are just those people that are incredible volunteer leaders. They live it, they breathe it, they're all into it, and they're on multiple boards. So building a pipeline is probably a real important process for us to start to set those early stages. So somebody like Wasim could see in his formative stages that, wow, this is a pathway where I could get involved with an organization and see it through. I remember when I was in New York and I was working with a large organization that served people with developmental disabilities, worked with, I think, BoardStrong and BoardSource and a couple of other places. And there was already these automatic pathways where, strong established industries established with their junior executives, hey, you should probably sit or find a space into a not-for-profit. Something like that would probably work well here. It just needs the structure and the time and the organization.
I actually think, as someone who does a lot of board recruiting, I think it's very mixed across industries here. And we are, everybody, I think on this call should really think about advocating with the organizations that they work for to support them in their board service, because that can make a critical difference in whether people have the time to actually do it. So, let's go to you and your funding mix and board fundraising, and that's, that topic.
Yeah, Baruch is primarily funded by Ted Arison Foundation. That's when you are funded by heavily funded by a foundation. The game is a bit complicated, because in one hand it gives me a lot of air to breathe in terms of the money that operates the business, the organization, but on the other hand, I have to obey to a lot of the goals and the things that important to the Arison Foundation. Sometimes it's a bit complicated to juggle between Ruach Tova's goal and how we meet the Ted Arison Foundation goals and the way they want us to operate. But that's one of the challenges that I have as a CEO in general. Maybe I'll talk about it later. But that's one primary source of funding that Ruach Tova has. But we also have another very important funding source, and that's our services that we sell for businesses. In Israel, businesses that work with the recognized NGO, they get that tax reduction. So we do have they do have some incentive to work with us, although we have to provide some value for them. So what we do, and I think that's a crucial thing for any organization in general, but especially an NGO. It's very important that the NGO have some services, provide some services that it can sell. And when I say and the businesses and municipalities in my field and other national initiatives, sometimes it's some offices of government offices that see our service or services as a value for them. They pay for what they get for our time, basically. So that's another very important funding.
So to clarify, their organization, that the corporation will, you provide volunteer activities for their employees, and that's a value to them. Okay.
Yeah, we provide an annual volunteering program, an entire program that actually calls their employees to volunteer their time and effort as part of an entire program that we work together with the company on according to their goals and values, and you know, to operate an entire program with hundreds of volunteer activities that can be done in different types of groups, and especially if the business is operates nationwide. It's a lot of work that we basically save them, but not only save them, but we can also value, and we have management tools and registration, and we have some CRMs that we provide in order to measure and to manage the volunteer activities, and we also provide impact measurement analysis, that reports that we provide for them. So basically, they can see the value, that the business value that the organization can get from employee or corporate volunteering program for their company. And the other source of funding that we have, and that's also pretty unique, I think. It's unique in Israel, but it's also, I think it's a very unique source, and that's it's a public donation, but we call the individuals to donate our organization, but not in the regular way where they can just decide on a monthly or annually sum that they provide. There's a very unique platform in Israel which allow individuals to round each purchase that they make everywhere with their credit card to the next dollar. So basically, they just sign for it, and they decide which of the NGOs that are part of this platform they would like to donate their nearest dollar. And every purchase they make, they basically donate some cents to their organization. Annually, it's about $20 a year. So if you have hundreds of individuals that decide to support your organization, it's an important source of income for us, and you can keep it growing, grow, and also the other thing is that usually it becomes like a passive source of income, because most of the people that decides to take part of this platform, once they did it, they forget about it, and the money is being donated each month to the organization.
Okay, that's
The tough
brilliant.
problem to have, really tough.
I have a new cause, right? If you go to buy pet food, they'll ask you to round up, but not every single time. I think that's brilliant. Wasim, let's turn this over to you now.
Yes. So in terms of requirements or expectations from board members, we don't have funding expectations from board members. We decide instead to focus mostly on getting donations and funding from individuals, and we rely a lot on our strategic partnerships with larger nonprofit 501c3 organizations based in the US and elsewhere that are looking to operate and support Yemen, and that care about what's been going on there and helping the Yemeni people, but that don't have access to implementing projects or distributing aid within Yemen because of the many reasons, rules and regulations and licensing that's required for by factions and different government entities within Yemen for international NGOs to operate in Yemen. So, but we have that licensing that makes us unique as a US-based NGO operating in Yemen. And thanks to our incredible CEO, Summer Nasser, who's just a rock star and has really led this organization to where it is today. She was able to kind of lead the charge in getting that type of access. So I would say about maybe 20, and don't quote me on this, it's kind of an estimate here, 20% of our funding comes from individuals, and then and the remaining comes from our strategic partnerships. 40% of that is kind of in kind, and then 40% is grants from those partnerships that are dedicated to specific projects, like for example, our ambulance emergency medical service project in Taiz, Yemen, where we have an ambulance service that's completely free for the public for residents in Taiz, that partners with a public hospital there, a water well project in the Abyan district, which is kind of in the south, close to Aden, and the food basket projects during the holy month of Ramadan, where people may not be able to, may not have the resources to kind of break their fast and buy food to break their fast, and we provide that. That's essentially the funding breakdown for the organization.
Right. That's really great. Spoiler alert, in a couple of questions I'm going to ask you about your biggest challenges. And it strikes me that the three of your organizations were both created to fill a gap. There was a need, and visionary founders helped create them, which is, it's pretty amazing, and the genesis of, I think, a lot of nonprofit work throughout the world. So, but first let's start with a little bit about just sort of how you fit into the international community generally. Are you aligned with the UN sustainability goals? What about social justice goals? How do you think about yourselves as citizens of the world in addition to citizens of the countries where you operate? Wasim, you're nodding your head. You want to start with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just it's in the DNA and the fabric of the organization. When we kind of look down the list of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, when you think about poverty or hunger, health, well-being, education, gender equality, clean water, sanitation, clean energy, these are all explicitly listed as goals, sustainable development goals by the United Nations, and they're all aligned with projects that we are very intentional about and that we implement in Yemen. So it's interesting. We didn't kind of think about growing the organization with the UN goals in mind, but it just turned out that when we look at the United Nations goals and what they're hoping to accomplish through these goals, and kind of the fabric and the mission of Yemen Aid, we're very much aligned with what they're doing in or kind of their goals. So yeah, so it's in our DNA, it's in our fabric.
That's great. That's great. I imagine that must be a challenge in working in a country that's in the middle of a crisis that, as Yemen actually is.
Yeah, it is, but it's also, it gives us an opportunity to kind of really really help, and because it's in conflict, that brings a lot of these goals to light, and if anything, it brings more attention to what's going on for things related to poverty or hunger. And this crisis essentially exacerbated a lot of these areas that require our assistance. So it's I don't want to use the word opportunity for in this context, but we see this as a way to really the conflict. I mean, as a way to really address a really important important needs across the country and align that. And those are all aligned with the UN goals.
Right. Matt, either if you want to go next.
Yeah, we for our instance, it's actually very effective to align with the SDGs or connect to international organizations. We were founded, with this focus on how do we change local context, how do we kind of move forward out of a post-colonial experience and a small island developing state circumstance to try and kind of move these bigger picture items. And looking locally, it was hard to draw examples for where we're going to see change. So when we looked at what the country, which has been maybe more aspirational, has signed on to, so the SDGs and CARICOM obligations and other types of international components that spoke to and rationalized what we were talking about, it gave us a broader context. We line ourselves up with the SDGs, and I think we are 1, 4, 6, 1, 4, 8, 10, 17, and 16 are things we work on specifically. And we've been able to find that in our direct work. There was a few administrations ago, there was actually the development of a draft national development plan, which actually even bridged our local obligations and focuses and goals against these. And so we fully embrace that and purport them and talk about it. At the same time, the Bahamas tends to be, like a lot of countries, a little bipolar in this way, in that sometimes all we want is what's elsewhere. And we think, oh, well, what's going on in Singapore? We could do that here like that. What they did in Australia, that's exactly what we're going to do. At the same time, when you bring it here, there's also a very specific focus on what works here is entirely unique. It only works in the Bahamas like this. And so finding a place to chip away at both of those philosophies helps us, and these international goals can help us to say, okay, well, what does that look like here? When we're making gains on poverty, we're looking at social justice and peace. How does that apply in a Bahamian context, and in a space where what's unique about the Bahamas in many ways is we're an archipelago. So we have 16 different populated islands that stretch over many hundreds and almost thousands of miles. That means we also have to think about what it looks like in an urban setting, like our main island of the Bahamas, as well as a small island that might only contain a couple of thousand or even a couple of hundred people, and ensure that the work that we're talking about is relevant in all of those things. So it is good for us, and we try and maintain, it was obviously easier before COVID and all that, we try and maintain a presence every year at a couple of different spaces, but we try and be strategic why and where we're making those pairings. One area that I think we haven't really cracked, which I think could be a great relationship development, is connected to the wider Bahamian diaspora. There's like most small developing islands, there's kind of a brain drain that tends to happen where folks go through the system, they go away, they get educated. And here, I think the last estimation was about 60% of those people who go away for education stay there or find opportunities in other jurisdictions. So connecting to those that would have developed here but now gone away, and building their capacity to be involved and engage is, I think, a hurdle that our organization and others locally will look to. And maybe those international expectations and obligations could be a good framework for that.
Yeah.
The thing is that with the field of volunteering is closely related to all SDGs basically, and as an infrastructure organization which work with all three sectors, every program that we do, every initiative that we take part in or lead, must meet at least one of the SDGs. For example, of course, when we talk about the fact that we work with hundreds of NGOs in Israel that promotes different fields and sectors and people that in need in some way. The fact that we try to and bring volunteers that never took part in volunteering before to their organization, we basically advance the specific SDG that the organization promotes. But with a corporate volunteer, and I talked about a little bit before, it's even more complicated, because we go to corporates and we offer them a volunteer program that builds on their employees' wills and the the issues that they want to promote, and it meets them in first of all, we tell and we show the companies that having a volunteer program for their company that is well established and strategic in some ways, it increases team morale and it reduces employee turnover. It builds useful skills and it boosts brand immunity. And when they understand this, it goes directly to it connects directly to the what's going on in the employee, basically in having employees these days. They, we know from different sources that the Z generation claim that inclusion and diversity play a major role in their decision in where they want to take part and which organization they want to work for. They want to feel a sense of contribution and meaning. And when corporates understand that through a volunteer program, they can promote all SDGs that the company has, and simultaneously to draw more employees, or the employees that they want to their companies, it becomes a different story, and the whole issue of working with us and thinking about how they can value from it. It's a different we bring them to a different point of view, and it becomes a real issue for them.
It occurs to me, listening to you and then comparing my work with, US-based nonprofits, is that your organizations have a very clear sense of your place and your membership in a worldwide community, right? Whereas if you were to go to, you worked for a US-based organization, right? It starts out, many of them start out with very insular. They don't think about themselves as global citizens, more as US citizens. And I wonder if that's something that you want from your board members when they start out, or if it's sort of a learning process and and an onboarding assimilation process that you bring to them, that kind of awareness, so that they can reflect it back on your organizations. Is that a fair question?
I think it's a little bit of both for us. With many of our board members, if they truly understood the full implications of what it meant to be involved with us, it might be a big bite to chew. So we start off with more simple and local endeavors. We also have a mandate where people can find their space in a few different areas. I'm a private sector person, and I really want to make sure there's a more sustainable laws that support and policies that support local economic development, versus I'm somebody who's I'm a transparency, a flag waver. I want to make sure that we that's what we gain. But I think in many ways we have a sense of ourselves as a in the context of the global setting, because that's part of the challenge of a small island developing state. We're affected by things that are come from spaces we can't control, like disasters and financial crisis, COVID and inflation and all those types of things. And so we have to very much see that and be conscious of what the world is doing. We also, in many ways, from the not-for-profit sector, have depended upon lots of outside sources to come and support things that we may not be as valuing locally. We have big issues related to gender equity and violence and things that happen here that we haven't been able to sustain and develop some of the local supports to get things started. So there is an interest in particularly in the issue of disaster relief relating to managing and engaging with either funders that are outside our country or technical support or a partnership with international NGOs that come in and provide that support. But I think one of our biggest challenges is we haven't done the best job in transferring that knowledge or taking what comes from that international stake and applying it here as locally, or looking to foster more local resources. So there was a big rush at a certain point to develop a 501c3, kind of a sister organization in the States for your not-for-profit here, because that way would tap you into the potential audience in the US. We don't put that same kind of energy into fostering and generating and identifying local individual donors. And I think that we, looking at what elsewhere is sometimes prevents us from taking advantage of the opportunities that might be more grounded in our own shores. That being said, it also is challenging philosophically philanthropically, because although we have some of the wealthiest people in the world that do come here periodically, they also come here to not be known and not necessarily share their resources. So there is still work we have to do in our own culture about identifying what the needs are, engaging folks, building upon their local capacity and particular interest, and then making that marriage. But being aware of what happens in the US or the UK, well, there was lots of attention on the coronation and lots of attention on the Trump town hall. So we could probably do a little less focus on them.
Yeah, sublime, ridiculous. I'm not going to comment on which was which. Or Wesley, do either of you want to take up that question at all? Like whether you see yourselves more as global citizens than your average US-based organization and how that impacts you? Not really. Okay, Wesley.
I'll take a stab at it. I think we definitely, although we are US based, our board is here in the US. Our CEO, Summer Nasser, will actually start splitting her time between Aden, Yemen, and New York. We do see ourselves as a global internet or international focused or an organization that has a sort of a reach into Yemen. I think it's important for us to also engage with folks who care about what's going on in Yemen abroad as well. We try to get more engagement via donors or international organizations that want to be involved in helping Yemen and in the ways that we do in Europe, for example, or in other parts in South Asia. So I think it's important. We think it's important as an organization to engage as much people as possible from abroad and other international organizations to help Yemen, because we realize that Yemen doesn't get as much attention, as I mentioned before, as it should, given the situation that's going on there and the need, the humanitarian crisis. And there are a lot of other crises happening around the world, Ukraine and Sudan, and those are all very important. And Yemen tends to kind of lose its momentum with all this media attention in other places, or media coverage in other places, and all those other places deserve as much coverage as possible. But because of that, what we try to do is engage as much organizations abroad and in the US, and individuals abroad and in the US, and in Yemen as possible to help the Yemeni people who are in need. So to answer your question, Barbara, although we are a US-based organization, we try to act on an international scale to target to Yemen and support Yemen as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Ida, would you like to jump in or?
No, I think I'm good. I don't have
right,
anything very to
All
add.
right. All right. Okay. All right. Well, second to the final question, talk a little bit about your greatest challenges as a leader of an international nonprofit. Do you have any takeaways for people on this panel who might want to join an international board or start an international organization?
I can start. I can kick us off here. I think, like I said before, Yemen Aid is relatively new, and we're still learning as we go, and it took a lot of learning, and it is a steep learning curve to kind of grow an organization, and especially an organization that works abroad, and especially an organization that works in a high conflict area. And so I think one of the big challenges that we had was really understanding the lay of the land, and understanding the different factions that have control over certain jurisdictions that we want to operate in. Yemen has become pretty fragmented. Different factions have different control of different jurisdictions, and we're not a political organization. We don't, we're not involved in any of the political affairs in Yemen. We only care about humanitarian aid, humanitarian assistance, and sustainable development, helping the Yemeni people as much as possible with our resources and our partners. So understanding the lay of the land within each jurisdiction. For example, it's different to operate in Sana'a now than it is to operate or implement projects in Aden, because Aden is the internationally recognized kind of government of Yemen, and Sana'a is sort of another de facto government essentially. So if we want to help people in Sana'a, it's a different process. There are different legal and regulatory requirements that we need to comply with if we want to do that. And there are different risks as well, whether it be security risks or financial risks and operational risks and things of that nature. So I think the biggest takeaway and challenge for us as we continue to grow and work in Yemen is really understanding the lay of the land, understanding what you're getting yourself into, understanding who are the key stakeholders in Yemen and in those different jurisdictions and factions that we need to work with. Once you do all, I think that's especially important for those who are looking to kind of start a nonprofit organization or join a small nonprofit organization and is responsible in helping grow it for a nonprofit organization that's working abroad.
Thanks. Who's next? All right, Matt. Oh, Ito, there you go.
Ito, do you want to go?
No, you go. You go.
Thank you. So it's funny because it does bring me back to when I was teaching at Baruch. We were teaching a fundraising course and started out with, and it was kind of a mix of folks who were coming from undergrad into and now getting their master's in public policy. And we were talking a lot about what does it take to not only, sustain and manage these organizations, but how to fundraise. And we started the class off and asked everybody, who here intends to start their own organization? And like 80% of the class, raised their hand for whatever mission it was. And I said, well, one of the challenges I will say is that, the causes are not multiplying the way that the organizations are, and neither are the funding sources multiplying the way the organizations are. So there's a lot of benefit to, collaborating, looking for existing organizations, partnering, bringing forward, collective effort versus starting your own thing. And I spent 16 weeks with that being an underlying theme to everything I talked about. And at the end of the class, I then asked, well, how many people still want to start their own organization? And it was like 70%. Still people want to do that. So I think in many ways, the bigger challenge we see here in the Bahamas is we aren't doing things together. We're still driven by that same sense of, I've got the answer, I've got to solve it, without doing the understanding of like, who else is in the space? What are the issues? How are these issues being addressed? How could I leverage my particular talents or unique or approach or network to something that is already in space? Maybe there is a legitimate gap, and if so, then obviously we need to address it. But if not, how do we get out of the I'm creating an organization across from the corner of the other organization, either because I didn't know or because I do know that person and I really don't like them, and that tends to happen. So what we're doing is we're kind of clouding the system here, and that becomes a challenge. Funding, which we'll all say is always going to be a challenge for us, is really in the space of we found our way to be able to sustain and maintain ourselves mostly through foundations. I guess I wouldn't shake a stick at Ito's solution of having one big funder that takes care of everything, but we do have to multiple grants that track us through a year. The challenge though also becomes how do we build out that individual funding capacity so that when things come up, we have the discretionary resources to invest in professional development and infrastructure and all those things. We get a lot of media attention. We're in the newspaper, a couple of times a week on a regular basis, but a lot of it is them seeking us out. So we haven't been able to really create or control our narrative. So having that stabilized funding is absolutely critical. And then the final component becomes really, the point of this conversation, in ensuring that our board is active and driven in the right efforts and committed. We're still getting to the point where we want board members to be very vocal about the fact that they are our board members. Some people have been long-term board members and you never know that in their public circles. So activating your networks in a space where it is a little challenging because the political parties are so powerful here has been difficult. And if we were able to get a more active and engaged network of our board, a lot would be potentially possible. So those are some of our direct challenges. We have an incredibly talented, bright team in engaged, and their ambitions and thoughts and ideas are very well researched and thought through. And so we could run for a long time based on the plans and the resources we have, but we just need to make sure we have as we talked about before, that there is that track before the train starts going too fast. And I think then we could be in a better space.
What are your greatest challenges, opportunities?
At BoardStrong we have 50 employees, so finding new funding sources and building healthy organization culture are my daily challenges. But also, as an organization which builds bridges between the different sectors, we must constantly bring value and stay updated with different areas and basically all the needs that the Israeli society is suffering from or in need. And I want to say maybe as a takeaway for everyone here. I would say that once you have a clear vision, select an issue that you wanna influence for the better, learn it, experience it, and by participating as a volunteer or maybe in other way, but then you can choose the organization that you can bring the most value and become a board member. Becoming a board member when you have an experience and you have the willingness to influence and you have the time to do it, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful way to make a change in your community. So that's something that I would give to this meeting.
That's great. All right, one final question, and one final question to you, and then we'll go for questions from the audience. So let's say someone on this call wants to join your board. Can they? How would they go about it? Do you do Zoom meetings? Do you require people to live in, the area where you work? Do you require them to have experience in the country? that you're dealing with, or if they're just, fascinated with your cause, voluntarism, helping a war-torn country, building a civil society in a small island nation. What do you think?
I can say that, becoming a board member in my organization, of course, that's open for everyone. Since we work mostly in Israel, of course, we work globally with other organizations like us that operates in their countries. We work very closely with the Israeli society challenges. So if someone want to become a board member in my board, first of all, I'm not the one to select them, but they must understand the challenges that the Israeli society is facing, and they must have some experience in, as I said in the beginning, in they need to bring some value in terms of either some expertise or something that they can contribute to one of the employees, or maybe the organizations, or connections to other organizations that can increase the value and the influence of the organization. So I would say that of course being a board member in terms of time, effort is not a big deal. It's what you bring to the table once we meet, and of course we meet face to face, because most of our board members are from Israel. But in many since we have some people that work and fly all the time, so we do. And of course during COVID we did it via Zoom or whatever, and the other platforms. So this is not an issue. The issue is whether you can Israel challenges, the Israel society's challenges, and whether you can bring something to the table from your expertise and the experience. That's what I could say.
Thank you. Fair enough.
For us, our board is all Bahamian. The organization was started by Bahamians, and everybody but me is Bahamian, and I'm on that process, having been there about 10 years. But we do have spaces, or anybody from the Bahamian diaspora would also apply. So if there's anybody here who has roots from the Bahamas, that would be something we would look at. As Ido says, our process is selected by the board and voted on by the board and doing that. But we do have volunteer committees that we've established. One of the things that we identified early on was the board that formed us was not as fully representative as it needed to be. And so we were able to, add in different perspectives and get ideas and thoughts and have representation by building out volunteer committees that are kind of subsets of the board. So we have an accountable governance committee. In our past, we've had an education committee, an economic development committee, and those open the space for participation is wide open. So those are key things. I do think, though, make a blatant pitch, Barbara, that an entity like a BoardStrong or a program that could come down and start to facilitate that relationship from those potential volunteer leaders to connect them with and make appropriate matches within organizations that are in need would be bring great value locally. I think that's a critical need, and if we could see greater more standardized board placement, more standardized board expectations, a lot of those smaller organizations that are really still in their inception could start to flourish. So that's my thoughts.
I've been in Syracuse, Buffalo, and Rochester this month. Somehow justifying a trip to the Bahamas seems attractive, even though I love those places. Awesome.
In Yemen Aid's case, similar to what Ido mentioned earlier, it's important that our board at least has some knowledge or cares deeply about Yemen and what's going on in Yemen and what's been going on there. We don't meet in person. We're all spread out. I'm currently in Philadelphia as I complete my MBA at Wharton. or we have a board member who's in the Bay Area in San Francisco. He works at an Alphabet subsidiary company. We have another board member who is completing her actually undergrad degree at Yale, and is going on to pursue her law degree. And then we have Zach ER, another board member. He's getting his medical residency in Tennessee, I believe. And then we operate in Yemen. So I say all that to say, we're virtual. We meet virtually. So there's no expectation to kind of meet in person in any given location. We do like that, as Ida mentioned earlier, we do prefer that someone brings some level of expertise or knowledge, either in nonprofits management or board experience, or even a professional experience in a career that is sort of aligned in what we're doing. For example, we have a board member who's getting who's completing his residency, and that has helped us a lot in kind of thinking through how to provide medical services or medical care in Yemen. So that's been extremely important for us. I think those are the main areas where we're happy to get any to speak to anyone who's interested in joining our board. We're continuing to grow. We are continuing to grow our board. So if anyone is interested and cares about Yemen and and feels strongly about Yemen Aid's mission, we welcome the opportunity to speak to them.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I believe this is the part where we turn to Janet and ask if there are any questions in the chat.
Yes, indeed. From a few moments back, there was a question from an alumna who said, I'm on the board of a family justice organization in New York, and recruiting new members is always a challenge. I'm a busy working parent, as are most of my friends, so it's a tough sell getting people to commit. One strategy I've seen is releasing a call for board members, framing it as an opportunity that people can apply as a way to bring in new prospects. What do folks, the panelists here, think of the concept of having an open call for board members as opposed to perhaps a targeted search? And Matthew, why don't we start with you?
I think that would work in a space where people saw value of alignment with that organization. I think that the idea of kind of putting a broader call. The other space, though, does become all of those things of identifying who is the right board member. I mean, if you're starting an organization from scratch, that's maybe to give you a little latitude. But sometimes the composition of your board indicates who else might not be on that board that you may really need. So being as specific about what the call might be. Hey, we really need somebody who has a legal background, or someone that might be able to, bring in a marketing perspective, or come in and just, lead, be that super fundraiser to lead us down, through our capital campaign. That would also probably be part of an effective outreach if you're going to do that broadcast for, like, we're looking for the next, the next amazing star. Are you that person? By the way, you have to do these types of things. So I would kind of take it at that stage.
Ido, thank you.
I don't know what I think about calling the public for being part of a board, but in instances when when an organization chooses to enter a new field or a new to work on a relatively new aspect. Many of the organization changed their some of their missions during COVID, for instance. And so when we enter the business sector, and we work very closely with the Arab society in Israel. So in those instances, sometimes you need to find a new member that can bring a valuable aspect to the table, and it's not easy to headhunt them specifically. So maybe in that instances, when you reach to the public, you have to be very specific, as Matt, you said, with the requirements that he needs to or she needs to bring back. But maybe in those instances, it's a good idea to go away.
Thank you. Wasim?
Yeah, I would say that regardless of whether it's a call, it could more of a like a public kind of posting, or whether it's more targeted, board members absolutely need to be vetted carefully, and kind of gauge their commitment and experience and ability to kind of contribute to the organization and the board. So I say all that to say, we tend to lean more to kind of like referrals. We're really lucky to have, Raymond, our interim chair of our board, and Summer Nasser, of course, who's very well connected, in Yemen and over here with those who are kind of involved in the situation in Yemen and Yemen politics and Yemen organizations that work in Yemen. So a lot of the folks that we consider for our board tend to be referrals, and that's because it's important for us to kind of do that, have them vetted, and we think referrals are an important way to kind of bring people who have already gone through at least a layer or two of vetting before kind of having a broader discussion with the board about whether or not we want to bring another person on.
Barbara?
Yes. Janet is not going to be surprised that I'm going to present a slightly different point of view. So BoardStrong has a matching platform for organizations that can sign up to look for new board members, and people who are looking to be on board members can sign up. I think that I agree with everybody that you have to vet your candidates. This is a first screening that tells you what people are interested in, what their skills are, etc. But I think that back to the question of word of mouth, I think that sometimes our board members, they know each other, they knew each other, they've run out of people, they need to recruit from different pools. In addition to which, we know that diversity of thought and experience, and just if everybody knows each other, you have a homogeneous board, you're not going to make the best decisions and have the dynamic discussions that you need to have. I also feel like if you have a devoted Facebook following, put it on Facebook. Those people are already going to your site. They're already interested in what you do. And again, you don't have to say yes to everybody. You can say thank you for your interest. But, for some organizations, you mentioned you're a social justice organization. Well, that's a very popular topic right now. And if you are generating followers on your website or on your LinkedIn page, that there's good chance that there's somebody good who might be interested in being on your board, and that's the way you'll find them, not because they don't know anybody in your organization, they've maybe been to a thing or two. So I would definitely, again, agreeing that you have to vet people and you have to make sure that they care about your cause, and send them to my webinar on June 6th on what it means to be a board member, so they're not flying blind, but definitely do consider that kind of outreach as well.
Thank you so much. Do any of you have junior board members that or a tiered board structure?
We haven't. I mean, we have that dynamic that we see in many boards, which is 20% of people are doing the 80% of the work, but we're looking at maybe formalizing more of an executive board to be involved on a more regular basis, and then deployment of the rest of the board in different avenues. We haven't formalized that yet.
Anyone else?
We haven't reached the size to have kind of tiered boards. We hope to reach that size at some point in the foreseeable future. I think, but as of now, we are a leaner board, and I think for now we will probably keep it that way. But hopefully we'll grow to a point where we'll welcome junior boards.
Okay.
No, we do not have a junior board, and in general, we have a small board. It's more of an advisory board that's responsible for everything. But we don't have. Even though it's a wonderful idea, I have to say that I need to consider that because it builds for the future, and that's a way to make sure that the organization is refreshed, and the vision and the mission statement and everything is aligned with what's going on. And so I think it's a wonderful idea, even though we don't have something like that.
And Barbara, any comment?
I think junior boards can be great. I think that if you're going to create one, you have to know what tasks you want them to accomplish, not just, hey, show up, or,
Right.
Be on our letterhead or whatever. I think that what we see is we see junior boards dividing into two different camps, ones that provide volunteer activities and manage volunteer activities, and then others that do fundraising events, but sometimes they do both. So I think that if you're going to form a junior board, you need to create kind of a parallel structure to your real board. You want a president, you want a vice president, you want a secretary, you want to make it a structured leadership organization that is run by the junior board itself, not staff driven, at that, because that's just like, we want stuff from you. But then I think it's a really great source of board members too. So that you can have people who don't want to be on your board, who don't want to put in that time, but want to participate, or people who demonstrate leadership and will be great board nominees to roll onto your board in a future day. So
Have any of you had to fire a board member, as it were, or have a conversation about participation?
Yes, in this role and in others. Never firing directly a board member, but counseling off, that has happened. And then the other side has been working with volunteers, where we absolutely sometimes had to really come to separation on volunteers. The discussion with our current board members vacillates right now. We've just had a transition in leadership, and there is a bit of back and forth on what is the role of the board and the level of involvement at the day-to-day level versus what the board should be. And some of those conversations have been a little awkward when they functionally are your boss. So those do happen, but I don't know. Yeah, and then I see smiles from the other gentlemen, so I feel like that may be common.
I had experience of it's not firing, as Matthew said, but sometimes when a board member is part of a board for years, and sometimes you can be a passive board member and show up for twice or three times a year and do whatever it takes, even though. And many of those, when you reach the point that you need that you feel like a board member should leave the board, it usually connects to its participants, and it's more of first of all it's not me to make these calls, even though it's my advice to do it. And then it ends up very good if you do it on a phone call or a meeting, and you just reflect that it's not the same, and either you take part because you need your advice and your participation. If anything changed, maybe you should leave the board. So in my case, I had only one incident, and it ended up in a good way, understanding.
My recommendation: have a written board description. Make your board members sign it as an agreement every year. It helps you, right? Helps you plan how much money are they going to give? What committees are they going to be on? Is their company going to buy a table at your gala? That helps you plan. And then at the end of the year, if the answer is, well, we didn't actually do anything, it gives you an objective basis for a discussion. And, you know, people, back to your point, things happen. People face financial crises. Their job moves to Hong Kong, you know, I mean, it's like, you want to make sure that you have a way for them to gracefully exit, or for you gracefully to counsel them off.
Wasim?
Yeah, luckily we haven't had to kind of fire of any board members yet. We don't see that happening anytime soon, but we have had to remind ourselves at different points to kind of stay committed to the organization and our work and being involved. What we like to do when we bring on new board members is we allow for a kind of, I think, 3 to 6 month probational period, or kind of just like a period in the beginning of the board director's kind of stint within their first year to assess their commitment and their involvement, their attendance to meetings, their communication and commitment to the organization. And then at the end of that, we have a discussion about whether or not this person is actually aligned with our mission and our work. We haven't had to kind of reach a point yet where we've said, you know, this person actually isn't that committed, let's let them go. But we have had to kind of remind ourselves from time to time, you know, we're all so busy and we're all volunteers, and everyone has so much going on, and so from time to time we've had to say, okay, let's center, let's, you know, get back together and remember why we're doing this.
Yep, that's very good advice. Latanga has asked a question which may in fact be our topic for a future conversation, which is, what role does an executive director play on or with the board? And I think the dynamic between does the board report to the executive director? Does the director report to the board? Is a very curious dynamic, because the executive director has to serve the board with so much information, and yet the board also has the financial responsibility. Matthew writes, depends on the day. Does anyone have any brief comment on that dynamic, which may inspire future conversations?
Nothing brief.
Fair enough. Fair enough. How about I'll switch this around. Tell me about your best day working with a board member to date. A tiny, quick story about your best board member exchange. Matt, can you start us, Matthew?
We're a small team, so when board members are cognizant of the fact that we are running at, you know, just incredible speeds, and they check in to say, hey, what's going on, and here's what we need, and we can facilitate that on a quick turnaround. Those are great days. Those are great days when they get that the operational speed of it doesn't necessarily lend to a board member plopping in and making a decision which may or may not have the right context, but then giving an opportunity to either debrief or set up before an intense time where a board member is like, tell me what's going on right now. What are the biggest issues? What are the biggest challenges you're occurring? And then getting responses back from them where they're supporting you on those types of things. Hey, here's a new initiative, or here's somebody you need to talk to. That really helps. It reinforces with the team that they feel valued and that they're understood, and that also the board members are that. And then the reverse becomes the exact opposite. When you're running at 100 miles an hour and somebody plops in and starts talking about something in a very minute perspective that is entirely as if you didn't even think of that thing, because whereas that decision has been thought through levels of times and many points before that component, and then it just becomes a screech halt of that awkward place of how do you get somebody who is formative to the organization up to speed in a way that would not either delay what you're trying to achieve or would hopefully engage them in a way that has been maybe more important or meaningful for their role.
Thank you so much. Ido, a favorite board experience?
Yeah, I think Matthew put it accurately. I recently had started to work on a new initiative, very related to current events in Israel, and I built this entire plan. Send my board member, the relevant board member, the presentation. Made a phone call, and then right away he gave me a lead to the CEO of the organization that I really needed to take off, and no other questions, nothing, no strings attached, only a phone call, the correct person, and now I'm working very closely with him. That's a wonderful day.
Sounds like a great day. Wasim,
Yeah.
a favorite day on your board?
Yes, so just briefly to answer the original question, Summer Nasser reports to the board. Summer Nasser is our executive director, CEO person, reports to our board. She reports everything across, financial projects, operational updates, and then we make key strategic decisions based on her, reports to us. I think our favorite moments, we've had so many great moments, thankfully. So a lot of not so great moments as well, just kind of given the nature of what's going on and what we do with Yemen Aid. But when we got our first kind of $1 million, kind of in-kind donation from AmeriCares several years ago, it was, the prior year we had only brought in, I think maybe it's like a 5-figure in 5 figures in revenues, around 50,000 or so. And then the following year, we had this kind of $1 million in-kind donation from AmeriCares, which is one of our best partners. And so kind of that first kind of $1 million kind of donation was just a highlight for all of us.
So to everyone who is here, I encourage you to make these people's day and be generous with your giving. Of course, keep Baruch College in mind. We would welcome one of those $1 million gifts as well to Baruch College. But it's great to hear that it's money, it's partnership, it's influence, and it's action. So Barbara, any final comments?
This has been great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate hearing from you and learning about your causes. And I think just, people who have an interest in the international community should not limit themselves to organizations that only serve people in the US. Think about stretching and, broadening your interests.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your participation. This has been wonderful. We look forward to our next BoardStrong program in the fall. Stay tuned for details. And as Barbara said, there is June 6th is your next workshop, and May 17th is George's next workshop, or next session. So please stay involved and stay informed, and stay awesome Bearcats. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Go Bearcats. Thanks, everyone.
Go Bearcats.
And Janet, thank you so much for everything. We wish you well.
Thank
Best of
you.
luck on your next